The town of Holbrook had always been the kind of place people moved to for peace. Rows of identical houses with freshly mowed lawns lined quiet streets, and neighbors waved at each other even if they didn't know each other's names. Crime was rare, almost unheard of. So when a 911 call came in on a stormy Thursday evening about strange sounds coming from a house on Cedar Lane, it stirred a level of concern that quickly spread through the community. The caller, a middle-aged woman who lived across the street, hesitated before making the call. She wasn't someone prone to drama. But what she heard wasn't just the creak of a house settling or the hum of a television. It was a sound buried beneath the rain, faint but unmistakable, muffled, desperate, and human. She said it stopped after a few seconds, but it haunted her enough to dial the police. The house in question belonged to Howard Bell, a man who blended into the background so completely that most neighbors only knew him as the guy with the gray car. He had no visitors, no loud music, and no unusual routines. He worked as an archivist at the Holbrook Public Library and had been there for years without incident. His home was always neat, his grass always trimmed. He donated to local causes, dropped off canned goods during food drives, and occasionally attended church events. To the outside world, Howard Bell was boringly reliable. When officers knocked on his door, he answered quickly, dressed in a sweater and slacks, his expression calm. He didn't appear flustered or hostile. When asked about the noise, he chuckled and said he'd been watching a documentary with the volume turned up. He offered them tea, said he understood the concern. The officers stepped inside and looked around. The living room smelled faintly of old books and pine cleaner. Everything was tidy, nothing appeared out of place. But when they asked to see the basement, a subtle change occurred. His shoulders tightened. His smile faltered. He explained the basement was a mess, just full of boxes and tools. He insisted there was nothing dangerous down there. Without a warrant, the police couldn't force their way in. One officer asked again about the noise. Howard repeated it was likely the television. With nothing more to go on, they made a note of the interaction and left. But something didn't sit right. The rain had masked much of the outside sound, yet the woman across the street had still heard something disturbing enough to report. That kind of noise doesn't just come from a TV. As the officers drove away, one of them made a quiet comment, "We'll probably be back." They had no idea how right they were. The next morning, Howard didn't show up for work. His supervisor called his home, then his cell phone, no answer. It was unlike him. He never missed a shift. And when the library staff mentioned the police visit from the night before, the concern grew. Something was wrong on Cedar Lane, and Holbrook's peaceful illusion was about to shatter. The morning after the police visit, a quiet tension settled over Cedar Lane. It wasn't something people talked about openly, but the air felt different, heavy, uncertain. At the library, Howard Bell's absence was more than unusual. He was never late, never sick. His workspace was left untouched, his name badge still hanging on the back of his office chair. After multiple unanswered calls, his supervisor filed a missing persons report. It might have seemed premature in most cases, but everyone who knew Howard described him as meticulous. Something was clearly off. That same afternoon, a gas company technician was working just a few houses down from Howard's residence. There had been a report of a minor leak affecting one of the lines. While inspecting a nearby vent outside Howard's house, the technician caught a strange, bitter smell in the air. Not exactly gas. It was metallic and sour, unlike anything he was used to. He also noticed a faint electrical humming, like old machinery running below the house. Curious, he stepped closer to the basement window. It was sealed shut and covered in grime, but he thought he saw movement, or perhaps shadows, beneath the slats. Following protocol, the technician reported the unusual smell and noise. It was passed along to the local police, and suddenly, everything connected. The prior night's report of screaming. Howard's disappearance. Now this new detail about an odor coming from the basement. The police didn't wait. They returned that evening, but this time with a warrant. When they arrived, the front door was locked. No lights were on inside. They knocked, then pounded. No answer. After a few attempts to reach him by phone, they forced entry. The house was eerily still. It was just as clean and orderly as the day before. Nothing appeared disturbed. No signs of struggle. But this time, They had permission to go where they couldn't before. Down in the basement, the air changed. It grew colder, damper. The stairs creaked under their feet. The first thing they noticed was the faint metallic scent the technician had mentioned. Then, deeper in the shadows, came the horror. The basement was not just a storage space, it was a prison. Thick metal chains were bolted to the concrete walls. Stained mattresses lay in corners. The lighting was dim, but it was enough to reveal everything. There were video cameras, old, dusty, and positioned at calculated angles. A desk held rows of labeled tapes and notebooks. The furniture was bolted down. One wall had a soundproofing layer crudely nailed over it. But the worst discovery came when one officer noticed a square in the floor that didn't match the rest of the cement. A hidden trapdoor, concealed beneath a rug and a shelf. They forced it open. Below was a sub-basement, deeper than expected. It had no lighting, no windows. And inside were the remains of at least 5 individuals, decayed, disfigured, and hastily covered. The silence was unbearable. The officers had stumbled upon something far beyond what they were prepared for. The man no one ever noticed had been hiding a nightmare beneath his floorboards. As investigators secured the property on Cedar Lane, word of the discovery began to spread. What had started as a missing person report quickly escalated into a full-blown crime scene. Forensic teams arrived within the hour, cordoning off the entire house and setting up portable lights that poured a sterile glow over the quiet suburban street. Neighbors watched in stunned silence from behind curtains, some too shocked to speak. Police vehicles lined the block. Reporters soon followed, though the details of what had been found were kept tightly sealed. Inside the house, evidence collection was underway. In the main basement, detectives uncovered rows of meticulously labeled VHS tapes, some stored in rusted filing cabinets, others stacked neatly in locked metal crates. Each tape bore a single handwritten label, a name and a date. Alongside them were spiral-bound notebooks, all written in the same tidy script. The contents revealed a chilling level of organization. Each victim had been catalogued, selected, watched, abducted, and recorded. Howard Bell had documented everything. The tapes showed footage of individuals held in the very basement where they were discovered. Bound, terrified, sometimes for days at a time. The walls and layout in the footage matched the current scene perfectly. There were no gaps. No disguises. Howard had recorded his crimes in raw, unfiltered detail. Some tapes were older, grainier. Others looked recent. He had stopped at nothing to preserve the memories of his victims. Worse still were the journals. They included not only names and timelines, but also disturbing notes on each person's psychological responses, physical endurance, and attempts to break them. Howard seemed to consider it a kind of research, a twisted obsession framed as a personal study. There was no remorse, no guilt in the tone of his writing, only curiosity and cold precision. Then came the numbering system. Each journal was numbered. Each victim file followed suit. When they counted them all, authorities realized there were 38 entries. 38 victims. Only 5 bodies had been recovered from the hidden sub-basement. That left 33 unaccounted for. Investigators feared the worst. Either their remains were buried elsewhere, or some had been disposed of in ways that left no trace. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search the property and surrounding areas, but nothing more was immediately found. The case grew darker with every hour. Police began tracing missing person reports across the state and beyond, looking for any connections to the names in Howard's records. Some matched cold cases. Others led nowhere. Several victims had never even been reported missing. Forgotten runaways, the homeless, individuals without families to sound the alarm. What became painfully clear was that Howard Bell had operated for years, maybe decades, completely undetected. The walls of his home had held screams no one heard, and his crimes had gone unnoticed by a town that prided itself on safety and routine. Holbrook had unwittingly harbored a monster, and now the truth was unraveling. One tape, one page, one victim at a time. The search for Howard Bell became one of the most intense manhunts in the state's history. With the horrifying evidence uncovered in his basement and the sub-basement gravesite, he was no longer just a suspect. He was a calculated predator who had managed to vanish without a trace. Within hours of confirming his absence, police issued an all-points bulletin. His photo appeared on every local news station. Social media exploded with warnings. Tips flooded in from people convinced they had seen him at grocery stores, gas stations, or rest stops. Most led nowhere. Howard had disappeared as smoothly as he had lived, quietly and deliberately. Inside his attic, investigators found what they believed to be his exit strategy. Hidden behind a panel were several bags, one filled with neatly stacked cash in different currencies, another containing a change of clothes and a forged ID under the name Henry Blake. There were also bus schedules, train maps, and burner phones, all untraceable. In one corner of the attic sat a uniform from a local delivery company, complete with an ID badge that looked convincingly real. It became clear that Howard had been preparing for this moment long before the police ever knocked on his door. Surveillance footage from a nearby bus terminal confirmed the worst. Just hours after the initial police visit, Howard had walked into the terminal dressed in the delivery uniform and boarded a westbound bus under the name Blake. He carried nothing that drew attention. No suitcase. No sign of panic. He had moved calmly, blending in as though he were any other tired worker catching a ride out of town. The footage was a blow to investigators. By the time they retrieved it, he was already days ahead. The FBI stepped in, elevating the case to a national level. Roadblocks were set up in neighboring states. Tips were filtered through federal databases. Still, Howard remained invisible. Back in Holbrook, the house on Cedar Lane stood silent, surrounded by police tape and watched over by rotating officers. It had become a morbid landmark, attracting onlookers, reporters, and even conspiracy theorists. Some claimed Howard had been aided by someone on the inside. Others believed he had been killing for a secret group or cult. None of it could be proven, but the theories only added fuel to the public's growing obsession with the case. For the victims' families, those who had been identified, the lack of closure was agonizing. For those 33 still unaccounted for, hope mixed with dread. Could some have survived? Had Howard kept others alive somewhere else? Or were their fates sealed long before the basement was ever discovered? With each passing day, the man who had gone unnoticed for so long remained a step ahead. Despite every resource, every agent, every search team combing the country, Howard Bell had vanished into the crowd. He had prepared for this moment with the same care he gave to his crimes. And the most haunting part, 3 months had passed since Howard Bell vanished, and the trail had gone cold. Every possible lead had been followed, every reported sighting investigated. Yet none brought the authorities any closer to capturing him. The case remained open, but the momentum had slowed. New crimes elsewhere took over the headlines, and public interest began to fade. Still, within the Holbrook Police Department and the FBI task force assigned to the case, the hunt never truly stopped. There was always the unsettling knowledge that someone capable of such calculated horror was still out there, walking free. Then, without warning, something arrived at the Holbrook precinct, a simple postcard. It was tucked into an unmarked envelope with no return address, postmarked from somewhere in the southwestern United States. The front of the postcard showed a serene beach scene, blue skies, empty sand, a calm ocean. It would have been unremarkable if not for the message written on the back in precise, block lettering, *, you found the easy ones. *. The handwriting matched samples taken from Howard's journals exactly. Forensics confirmed the paper and ink were consistent with supplies found in his home. There were no fingerprints, no DNA. But the message was clear. Howard was watching. He hadn't run out of fear. He had disappeared on his own terms. And now, he was taunting them. The implications of the message were chilling. If the 5 victims found in the subbasement were the easy ones, then what had happened to the others? Investigators feared that Howard had more burial sites, perhaps spread across multiple states. The level of planning he had demonstrated suggested long-term strategy. It was possible, even likely, that he had relocated victims over time, using isolated locations to hide the evidence. If so, entire chapters of his crimes remained undiscovered. The postcard reignited national attention. News outlets covered it with grim fascination. Experts weighed in on what it meant. Some called it narcissistic. Others saw it as a challenge, a statement of control. Whatever the intention, it proved that Howard was still out there and still thinking about his crimes. Following the postcard, a fresh wave of searches began. Investigators cross-referenced all locations Howard had traveled to over the years. His library job had given him access to countless travel records, planning materials, and even public records about missing persons. Teams revisited cold cases in cities where Howard had briefly lived or worked. Cadaver dogs were deployed in rural areas near those regions, but nothing concrete was found. As time dragged on, theories multiplied. Some believed he was hiding in plain sight, living under another name in a quiet town, just like he had before. Others feared he had already moved to another country. But no matter how many theories emerged, one fact remained. Howard Bell had exposed the flaws in a system that had never suspected him. He wasn't just a man who vanished. He was a man who had planned every step. A man who had walked away from the wreckage he created, leaving behind bones, videotapes, and one final message that continues to haunt those who read it. And in the silence that followed, the world was left to wonder how many more secrets remained buried.